It's great to have all of you here tonight because we have got some very exciting things to talk about. November 27th, 2011 is a very exciting day in the history of the church in the English-speaking world for this reason. The Mass that we received from Rome after the Second Vatican Council, what we call the Novus Ordo Mass, we in the English-speaking world, for the very first time ever, are going to pray this Mass according to its actual text. We are going to pray the words that Rome gave us 40 years ago that we have never said. The beauty of many of the prayers in the Mass that were given to us 40 years ago, we're going to experience for the very first time. And I hope, if you're not already excited about it, by the time we are through tonight looking through the Mass, you will be. And why and how have we come to this moment? I'm just going to give you a very brief explanation for the reasons that brought us to where we are today. Approximately 40 years ago, after the Second Vatican Council, we received this Novus Ordo liturgy. And of course, everything that comes to us from the church is originally published in Latin, the official language of the church. And for the first time in 400 years or more, permission was given to pray the Mass in the local vernacular. Although, and I always like to point this out to people because a lot of folks don't realize this, the bishops who actually met at the Second Vatican Council, what their vision was for a revised liturgy was that certain parts of the Mass would have the option of being prayed in the local vernacular. They never envisioned the entire thing in the local language. But pretty soon the local bishops' conferences asked for permission and it was given pretty quickly. So here's the situation circa 1970. We have this new Mass that people are going to pray in their own language, and they have never done this before. Because Mass has only been in Latin for 400 years. So now the Mass needed to be translated. And as the work of translating began, and this didn't happen with all languages of the world, but it did with the English translators, a group known as ICEL, the International Commission on English in the Liturgy, because everybody has to have an acronym these days. ICEL began translating from Latin to English, and as they did, they came across what seemed to them were concerns, where if they translated literally from the Latin, it would come across somewhat awkward to us English-speaking folks, because we would have to say things that we're not used to saying in our everyday language. There would be some awkward syntax here and there, and their concern was because they wanted this transition. Because remember, 40 years ago, two big changes. First of all, a new Mass. Although it evolved from the Tridentine Rite and retained some of its elements, it was pretty much a brand new Mass to begin with. In addition to a brand new language, it was a huge change that folks are going to need to go through. And so the translator's concern was, we want this to be a smooth transition for our people. We want them to be comfortable praying the Mass in their own language. And we think there are going to be some spots where that's not going to happen. And so the Vatican issued guidelines for translating in a document that was actually published in 1969. And in those guidelines, the Vatican said, if there are certain passages of the Mass that you think are going to be awkward for your people, in a literal translation, you have permission to paraphrase or to translate it somewhat loosely. Do what you need to do to make people comfortable. Now, not all languages of the world took advantage of that permission. In fact, many of the languages stayed very, very faithful to the Latin. ICEL took great advantage of that. And as you're going to see tonight, there are many key parts of the Mass where ICEL chose, instead of translating the actual text, they substituted something else. There are key parts in the Mass where they actually removed the actual text of the Mass, took it out, and replaced it with something else that really wasn't there in the first place, all because they thought that we would be more comfortable saying it. Now back then, certainly it was a concern. However, 40 years later, what our bishops have done is they have noticed the effects in countries where the Mass has not been prayed the way it really is, where many liberties have been taken in the translation, or where substitutions have actually been made, and they've noticed a number of concerns. The primary concern is this. There is an ancient principle that the Church has always held to in liturgy. The Latin words are lex orandi, lex credendi. Literally translated, it means the law of prayer is the law of faith. What it means in practicality is this. The Church says that whenever we gather to pray liturgy, the words that we pray need to form us in our faith. The words need to express the truths of what we believe. In other words, the Mass is very rich in theology. The Church wrote the Mass to teach us more about our faith. So if the text has been altered, if the words have been watered down, or if other things have been substituted, thus the theology has been watered down and has been substituted for other things. And our bishops have noticed this is what has happened, primarily with the English-speaking Mass. And so in 2001, a mandate came from Rome that all translations of the Mass must be accurate, literal translations, so that people know the theology of the Mass, so that people know the richness that is really there. And they gave a 2005 deadline for submitting translations. ICEL just made it under the 2005 deadline. And the English translation, now the literal accurate translation, was approved in 2008, but permission to use it was not granted until 2010, so that the work could be done to prepare us for that. And now we're here. Tonight, we are going to look at the parts of the Mass that we have been saying for 40 years that really weren't parts of the Mass. And we're going to say the parts that are actually there. And we're going to compare them, and I'm going to give you some reflection on the meaning behind it. Because really, a couple of things are going on here. The beauty of the language, I hope you'll appreciate, is much, much richer. But again, the most important point, the meaning of the Mass comes through when we pray the actual text. And that's what